the world of print media, in the world of visual broadcasting. He is one of a kind, well respected, admired, always professional, never close minded. Bill Moyers, the MC of Public Affairs Broadcasting, has died at the age of 91. He was White House press secretary under Lyndon B. Johnson and Newsday publisher before becoming an acclaimed television journalist, mostly for PBS. In an article, in a biopic article written by Fred A. Bernstein for The Washington Post, I'm going to talk about it tonight. Tyrone Bowman live. On a personal note, I always admired Bill Moyers. Always. Always watched him, listened to him. I paid close attention to his delivery, his pronunciation of words, how well he was read, how open minded he was, how congenial he always was during his interviews with everyone from all walks of life. And if somehow during the course of my broadcasting career, whether it's through radio or even here on YouTube Live, if I can somewhat emulate this, it'll be a tribute to his legacy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, according to the Washington Post, Bill Moyers, who served as chief White House spokesman for President Lyndon B. Johnson, and then for more than 40 years as a broadcast journalist known for bringing ideas, both timely and timeless, to television, died June 26 at a hospital in Manhattan. He was 91. The cause was complications from prostate cancer, said his son William Cope Moyers. Long before he became a grandee of public television, the Texas raised Mr. Moyers was a top aide and by many accounts a surrogate son to Johnson. The most powerful Texas Democrat had given Mr. Moyers, the most powerful Texas Democrat had given Mr. Moyers a summer job in the U.S. Senate office in 1954 when Mr. Moyers was in college. Mr. Moyers arrived on Capitol Hill and without even unpacking his bags, worked through the night addressing 275,000 envelopes using a foot-operated addressograph machine. By the end of the summer, he was handling Johnson's personal correspondence. Over the next 12 years, when he wasn't studying or preaching, Mr. Moyers became an ordained Baptist minister in 1954. He found his way to the highest levels of government when Johnson was tapped in 1960 as the running mate of Senator John F. Kennedy, a Democrat from Massachusetts. Mr. Moyers became the liaison between Johnson and Kennedy camps. Quote, I could intercept Boston to Austin, end quote, he later told journalist Don Shelby. After Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, Mr. Moyers, not yet 30, became one of President Lyndon B. Johnson's lieutenants. Time magazine called him, quote, LBJ's young man in charge of everything, end quote. He was named White House press secretary in July 1965. So I have some photos here, Bill Moyers. I want to show them to you very quickly, and then I'll get back to reading. This is a nice stately photo of the late Mr. Moyers. Then I have two more here I want to show you as well. Looked more like a college professor back then. And here's one more of Mr. Moyers later on, toward the twilight years of his life. Now I'll continue with the article here. Mr. Moyers relished his role in shaping great society programs to alleviate poverty and foster racial injustice, but he grew rapidly disillusioned with Johnson's escalation of the Vietnam War. He left the White House in January 1967 in the middle of the president's second term. Johnson, he said, never spoke to him again. According to Mimi Swartz, writing in Texas Monthly in 1989, quote, Johnson, who at one time loved Moyers more than anyone else, punished him by pushing him further out of his life than anyone else. End quote. Didn't seem like President Johnson had any love or forgiveness in his heart for anybody. With a growing family to support, Mr. Moyers took a lucrative job as publisher of Newsday, the large circulation Long Island newspaper. He tilted the paper leftward in the support of anti-war demonstrations, lured a stream of leading authors to write for its pages, and led the newsroom to 2 Pulitzer Prizes. But his tenure was cut short in 1970 amid clashes with newspaper's conservative owner. Mr. Moyers then began a television career that would bring him more than 30 Emmy Awards, including one for Lifetime Achievement. He was mainly associated with PBS, or Public Broadcasting, which he joined in 1971, but he detoured to CBS from 1976 to 1986. He enjoyed the luxuries of working for a well-funded network that resented what he perceived as the intrusion of business concerns into journalism. Conversely, at PBS, he relished his role as resident intellectual, but funding was a constant concern. Mr. Moyers was widely known as a supporter of liberal causes, a reputation that made him a target for conservatives who viewed PBS as biased. Although he frequently explored societal ills, he was happier speaking with poets and philosophers than he was with pollsters or politicians. A typical Moyers production was, quote, Faith and Reason, end quote, 2006, a PBS series in which he asked various writers, in a world where religion is poison to some and salvation to others, how do we live together? As editor-in-chief correspondent for CBS Reports, beginning in 1976, he produced such documentaries as The Fire Next Door, about the near destruction of the South Bronx by arson. It's a test, he told viewers, of whether democratic capitalism will be made to work for the poorest among us, and the knowledge that unless we do act, the fires will no longer stop next door. Quote, close quote. In 1978, he produced a show on the dangers created by the sale of baby formula in developing countries. CBS executives feared the program would scare away advertisers. When network executives forced Mr. Moyers to tone it down, People magazine reported he sarcastically congratulated them and told them they had, quote, turned jaws into gums, end quote. Here is a photo of Mr. Moyers when he was Deputy Press Secretary Robert H. Fleming, President Lyndon B. Johnson, and of course, Mr. Moyers, he's in the photo as well. I don't know if I'm going to have enough time to get through this entire article tonight. In 1986, while filming The Vanishing Family, Crisis in Black America, for CBS, he asked for 90 minutes of airtime instead of the usual hour. When his bosses resisted, he threatened to quit and got the extra time for his powerful interviews with intercity residents about welfare, poverty, and the prevalence of single-parent households. The result, documentarian Ken Burns wrote in the New York Times, was, quote, perhaps Mr. Moyers' single best work, end quote. In stature, Mr. Moyers was often described in the same breath with revered CBS newsman Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite. Who could forget Edward R. Murrow, who was famous for his fire chat interviews, and Walter Cronkite, the dean of broadcasting. But he grew increasingly unhappy with the support he received from the network, and he said so publicly when he left in 1986. 2 years later, PBS aired his 6-part interview with Joseph Campbell, a professor who studied hero myths across cultures. Campbell's message was that anyone, by finding a purpose and devoting his or her life to it, could take a so-called hero's journey, the series, which treated spirituality as a route to personal fulfillment, became one of the most popular in PBS history. Around the same time, Mr. Moyers produced a 90-minute documentary, The Secret Government, the Constitution in Crisis, examining the Reagan administration's Iran-Contra scandal. The show promoted some Republicans to try unsuccessfully and in a recurring battle to block federal funding of PBS. Well, that's what's going on now. After the 2002 midterm election, Kenneth Y. Thomason, the chairman of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, was incensed by Mr. Moyers' statement on his program, quote, "Now," end quote, that the newly elected Republican Congress would, quote, "eviscerate the environment," end quote, and, quote, "force pregnant women to give up control over their lives," end quote. Tomlinson complained to PBS President Pat Mitchell that the show, quote, "does not contain anything approaching the balance the law requires for public broadcasting," end quote. PBS executives noted in response that Mr. Moyers booked many conservative commentaries on, quote, "Now," end quote. Cultural historian Neil Gabler, writing in the Los Angeles Times in 2009, observed that Mr. Moyers was, quote, "far less interested in advancing a particular position than in inspiring moral growth in the hope of creating a more just and benefit society," end quote. After leaving Newsday, Mr. Moyers embarked on a 13,000-mile road trip in which he spoke to people from all walks of life. In 1971, he published a book about those conversations, Listening to America, A Traveler Rediscovers His Country. In a New York Times review, author James Dickey wrote that Mr. Moyers, quote, "relies on an unfailing faith that if people will just talk to each other, get together on issues, everything can be worked out. There is little hint of the possibility looming more and more these days that there are conditions that nothing can help." Close quote. Mr. Moyers changed his tone as he was developing a push toward politics. Billy Don Moyers was born in Hugo, Oklahoma on June 5, 1934, and grew up in the northeast Texas town of Marshall. His father worked as a day laborer, while Mr. Moyers, his mother, raised him and an older brother, James. Coming from one of the poorest families in town, Mr. Moyers was frequently helped, he told Shelby, by, quote, "people older than me who saw something in me that I didn't see," end quote. Mr. Moyers pushed himself so hard in his academics and in his extracurriculars that at 15 he developed ulcers. A highlight of his youth was Johnson's arrival by helicopter in 1948 to make a campaign speech in Marshall. "No microphone, no loudspeaker," Mr. Moyers recalled to Esquire magazine, quote, "took his coat off, his tie was pulled back, his white shirt was glinting in the sun, and he was literally forcing himself physically on that audience of 3,000 to 4,000 people there on the east side of the square. I couldn't really hear him. I was in the back row, 14 years old. But I remember the sheer presence of the man, and I thought, that's what power is," end quote. After Mr. Moyers' summer in Washington, Johnson persuaded him to transfer from North Texas State College in Denton, now the University of North Texas, where he was studying journalism, to the University of Texas at Austin. In Austin, he worked for KTBC Radio and Television, which were owned by the senator's wife, Lady Bird Johnson. And as an assistant news editor, Mr. Moyers earned $100 a week, more, he said, than his father ever made, and enough to allow him to marry his girlfriend, Judith Davison, in 1954. He was ordained that year as a Baptist minister, and on Sundays he preached in the Texas Hill Country. He received a bachelor's degree in 1956, and 3 years later received a Master of Divinity degree from the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth. After the Kennedy Johnson ticket won the White House, Mr. Moyers was an assistant to the vice president, but he said there was nothing for him or his boss to do. he began working under the president's brother-in-law, R. Sergeant Shriver, to create the Peace Corps, developing its mission to export the best of American values. He told Shelby gave him the happiest 3 years of my life. Here is a photo of Mr. Moyers during a campaign in 1984 that he was covering. And I have another photo of Mr. Moyers at home with his wife Judith and their 3 children. That's a nice photo of him back in the day. But Kennedy's assassination changed everything. Back in Washington, amid the chaotic transition to a new administration, Mr. Moyers took on many tasks. He helped draft the 1964 Great Society legislation that addressed poverty, health care, education, transportation, and civil rights, and played a key role in Johnson's presidential campaign that year against conservative Senator Barry M. Goldwater, Republican from Arizona. Mr. Moyers signed off on the infamous Daisy Ad TV commercial, which juxtaposed footage of a girl picking flower petals with a countdown to a nuclear explosion. It is considered a progenitor of negative campaign ads that became increasingly common in later years. Quote, "I wish I could take it back," end quote, he told the Los Angeles Times decades later. As Vietnam diverted time and money from domestic programs, Mr. Moyers said, quote, "The things I cared about were no longer priorities." One day he told Shelby. He looked out at the reporters in the White House briefing room and thought, quote, "I wanted to be on their side," end quote. Meanwhile, Mr. Moyers had recommended his brother for a job in the press office. While working there, James Moyers developed a form of stomach cancer and killed himself in 1966. Mr. Moyers, according to Swartz, assumed financial responsibility for his brother's wife and children at Newsday, which offered him 4 times his annual government salary of $28,000. He brought in Pete Hamel as a star columnist and published former Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a Democrat from New York, on the problems of the inner city, and novelist Saul Bellow on the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. So you see how long they have been fighting. They've been fighting for a long time over there, ladies and gentlemen. The publication won major journalism awards, including a Pulitzer Prize for public service for an investigation into corrupt land deals. But Harry Guggenheim, Newsday's conservative owner, was unhappy with the paper's direction. When Guggenheim decided to sell the paper, Mr. Moyers offered to buy it, but Guggenheim declined, choosing the conservative Times Mirror Company instead. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave it here for tonight. I will continue part 2 of The Legacy as the Washington Post published in its heading. I want to read it one more time as I sign off for tonight. Bill Moyers, MC of Public Affairs Broadcasting, dies at 91. Tyrone Bowman, never surrender, never quit.